Influences on perception can impact how you come to believe the things you believe and experience life in the way that you do. This image here illustrates how much a cultural or physiological or social role might impact how you see things. You have the woman over here wearing the bikini and sunglasses saying, everything covered but her eyes. What a cruel male dominated culture. And then from a completely different perspective, you have the same comment, slightly altered, nothing covered but her eyes. What a cruel male dominated culture. And you would think that these would be exact opposite. You would think that each would understand their perspective, but they come from different cultures and therefore experience things in quite different ways. So we're going to look at these three forms of influence, these influences on perception, starting with culture. Oftentimes, cultural perspective is stemming from an us versus them mentality. We see our perspectives as the right ones and other perspectives as outside or them. In this case, we have a label for that, and it's called in-groupers and out-groupers. In-groupers are those that share our cultural beliefs, attitudes, and values and are considered fundamentally similar to us. So that might be people within your own family who believe the things you do or see things in the same way you will. It might be a completely different perspective in another culture, another region, even another family. And those would be considered the outgroupers. But our in-groupers tend to be those that have similar belief systems and view things in a very similar manner. And we're likely to form positive impressions of these people because they're similar to us. If we think back to the self-serving bias, it makes sense. If we would think positive things about ourselves in a certain situation, if we see someone very similar to us, we might again think of them as positive. For example, if you are a Republican, you may see other Republicans as good people. And the same would go if you are a Democrat or if you are the Green Party or whatever it might be. So your in-groupers are seen in a positive light. And when people behave rudely or negatively, we're likely to attribute that behavior to external factors. So, well, they're a good person, they're just having a bad day. The in-groupers get a lot of leniency, so to speak. Out-groupers are people that are not fundamentally similar to ourselves. So these people are those that have different cultural experiences, maybe different lifestyle choices and the like. And those folks, when we see them as behaving rudely or negatively, we are likely to attribute their behavior to internal factors, like their personality. Oh, they are not making any money, they have no job because they're lazy. So that would be considered an outgrouper. If we see these people as different from us fundamentally, then we see their behavior as their own issue, that it's not something external. It is that they are personally responsible for whatever is happening to them. One major concept that centers around this idea of us and them is what's called ethnocentrism. And ethnocentrism is the attitude that one's own culture is superior to others. You could take that a little further to say that one's culture is better than, more logical than, or more moral than another culture. So you might believe something to be true about your culture, and if it is not adhered to in a different culture, you see them as beneath you. Now, everybody experiences ethnocentric viewpoints, some to a different degree than others. There is quite a big range in how you can see ethnocentric behaviors. For example, if you are from the Indian culture, you may view that those that eat hamburgers are morally inappropriate. They have all kinds of issues and they are bound to deal with struggles their entire life. Whereas those from the American culture that aren't vegetarians aren't going to see it in that same light. So it depends on your perspective. Yes, I said earlier that we all experience ethnocentrism, but we experience it to different degrees. In that example I just mentioned, we might have somebody that experiences complete disparagement towards somebody that does something outside their cultural norms, somebody that might eat a hamburger or what have you. And you might see them as this horrible person, and you might degrade them verbally or in some other manner. Where you can see that there are some folks that do things on a disparaging level, there are others that look at it as more of a sensitivity issue. I see that they're different, and it seems odd to me, but I don't want to be disparaging, that I'm somewhat accepting that it's different, but I do see it as a difference. So therefore, it's a little bit more sensitivity to those differences. Again, we still are experiencing ethnocentrism, but some levels are different from others. So our culture can greatly impact us. Now, another influence is our physiological influences. Think about how each of these categories here might impact your perception of the world. If you are blind or deaf, that might impact how you see things, how you sense things, compared to somebody that is not experiencing those issues. And that goes with the physiological challenges, as I mentioned down at the bottom here. Next to that would be things like age. If you imagine the difference between those from the older generation and those from the college age generation, you can easily see that that would influence how we perceive the world. Sometimes you hear instructors say that students aren't the way they used to be. Well, that could very much be an age physiological influence. It is impacting how they see the world because they have grown up and experienced things in different ways. Same thing with health. If you are dealing with some kind of physical ailment or you're sick, you might see things totally different from someone who is experiencing robust health. Fatigue and hunger are also similar to that, as well as biological cycles. When you are still having children as a woman, you experience and perceive things differently than when you are aged out of that era. So there are a lot of different things physiologically, so physically, that can influence how you see the world. And another one, and our final one here, are social roles. And social roles, depending upon your circumstance, can lead to quite drastically different perceptions on the world. So for example, maybe you consider your occupation. Let's imagine the difference between someone who is a social servant and maybe runs a food shelter and someone who is in a development company who would like to take that area and rebuild it in a different light. Those two occupations are going to see the world quite differently. So depending upon that circumstance, you might see the world through a completely different lens. The same concept would apply to somebody who is an environmental advocate or an oceanographer, and that compared to someone who wants to drill in the ocean for oil. You're going to see the perspectives totally differently. Another would be gender. Men and women see things in different lights and experience perceptions in different manners. Now, in some cases, when we say gender, oftentimes we think of someone who is biologically male or biologically female, and that is not what I mean. I mean your identification as such. Do you identify as female or do you identify as male? So not necessarily biologically how you are labeled, but in your mind, how do you see the world? Do men see things, those that identify as male, in a different light from those that identify as female? Absolutely. Especially if you have grown up in a very media-based culture, you are likely to see things in very different, drastically different manners based on what you see in television and through movies and the like. So your gender can impact how you see the world. Your socioeconomic standing can also make a difference. What this basically means is your social status and how much money you make. So where are you in that circumstance? Do you make a great deal of money and have a lot of power? Or do you make a decent living, but you work at a job where you don't have a lot of power? So you are just one of a large community. That might change your perspective. Maybe you are barely getting by in your job, making minimum wage, and you have a difficult time paying the bills. So you are at poverty level and so have very little power in making changes at the government level. That will impact your perspective. There's a lot of our socioeconomic roles and how they can impact perceptions of various concepts. Political, religious, social, all of those things can be impacted by your socioeconomic status. And then finally, relational. What relationship do you have with a certain person or a certain group? So, for example, are you a child or a parent? Your relationship to that child, let's say you're a parent, your relationship to the child is going to determine your perspective in a different manner than somebody who is a child thinking of the same concept. So maybe the idea of what a good birthday is will be different for a parent as compared to a child. It just depends on the relationship that you have with that person. Are you married or are you dating? Are you best friends? And again, back to gender, are you a male female friendship or two males or two females? All of that can impact how you perceive the world. Each of these components, each of these influences, physiological issues, culture, and social roles are all a major part of how we communicate. These on their own can drastically influence how you speak and how you perceive certain situations. And that in turn can impact how you view your mindset, whether you feel like you have a growth mindset about certain topics or whether you feel very fixed. Each of these components can lead you to believe certain things that may or may not be reality because of that perception.